Okay, well, they're legitimate historical accounts of what
what?
the early Christians believed.
And guess what? None of those things that you just named, except for one. Name the time or the disciple that died or was martyred for their beliefs.
Or
Shut your
anything we
fucking
know about
cocksucking
Caesar,
mouth.
anything we
shut
know
the fuck
about
up, man.
K-Sun is
Right?
the biggest, bro.
Wait, who is it?
And then I got fucking muted.
He did say before that if, I definitely don't believe Peter, because if anybody was going to lie, it would be him. Yet you also said that he was the only one that you actually believe really did die for what he believed in. He didn't recant.
Then you go to all that information gets passed down to the next pope. I don't know who they are. Then the next pope, then the next pope, then the next pope. All that information is only being passed down orally. This is where the telephone argument is. How can you possibly... How can you possibly know that game of telephone is reliable if you don't have the original text?
Yeah, but I'm not talking about texts, right?
Yeah, I know. Like, there is no text. I just said that. There's no text here. There's no original Bible. There's no time in which the events in the Bible were ever recorded. So now we're just playing oral tradition. You can't possibly know. So,
Well, but if your critique is telephone game, right? Here, look. You're going to have the same issue, which is that you're not actually going to be able to juxtapose contemporary claims against something historical such that you could say they're false or not properly preserved.
I can when I can't actually when new information gets involved. Like, you say you don't care about 6-day creation.
No, you can't. You can't.
Yeah, you can.
No, you can't. Look,
Yeah,
you have to listen very. You have to listen very carefully to what I just said and what you just said. Take into account. You have to take into account what you just said, right? You said, look, even if there were no Bibles and it was a telephone game, right? You're saying that that's going to produce a problem because there's going to be some utterance and there's no original text or propositions to relate them to that are immediately available because they only exist in history, right? So you can't actually compare it, right? You just have, in theory, what should be the statement, but of course you invoke the telephone game because we all understand that you spread a message around a circle of 30 people. By the time it gets back to you, it's something different.
And
okay,
the example that I was going to
here's the problem. Hold on, please wait, because I'm almost there. I'm almost there, and this is important, right? Because if you're going to say that,
that's what she said.
The message, if you're going to say that the message was in fact obscured or altered, you likewise would have to know and have access to the original message.
Yeah, and I wouldn't under the point that I was gonna use again was 6-day creation. So the Earth would have been created under the chronology of the Bible about 6,000 years ago.
We don't believe that has to necessarily be literal.
And that information was first under Bible chronology given to Moses at 1440 BC. That's at least 3,500
Yeah, but all of these things you're saying
that's at least 3,500 years of knowledge that had to be passed down without a single written tradition, with no original text.
I don't know how.
The point where that comes back to Jesus is that how can you possibly know that the information that that Peter had, the first pope, how can you possibly know that that information is actually what was being said, not written down, but said? I don't know how you.
I'm not sure.
I know the point that you're making. I don't think that you're seeing the point that I'm making.
Because every single claim you're making about the scriptures is likewise going to be hinged.
It's just hyper skepticism. That's all you're doing, and you're not
applying
it.
I know that you're really narcissistic and want to jump in every 5 seconds, but chill. I want to talk to.
It's an open room. It's not a one-on-one. I can talk if I want.
I've never seen you jump.
I'm just adding something in. I'm just saying.
I've never seen you jump into a room where you couldn't keep your mouth closed.
Okay, and now you're getting emotional. So I'm just saying it's hyper skepticism, and his point is just that if you're going to apply this hyper skepticism, that's fine, but now you have to be consistent with other historical accounts.
I am.
That's all he's saying.
I am. I have.
Okay, so then you can't believe anything about the ancient world.
Yeah, I can. I can say that it's reliable about.
Yeah, more specifically.
Here, take the Bible for example. Take the Gospels for example. I have 5 criteria: who wrote it, when was it written, why was it written, who was it written for,
we weren't there, Bubba.
And who
were you?
Who was it? I'll start over. Who wrote it? When was it written? Why was it written? Who was it written for? And what is the genre of the text? All the Gospels fail the genre category because they could be written off as a historical fiction.
God
or
wrote
fantasy.
it, the finger of God.
The breath of God, Grudge, and get it right.
The whole Bible was written by the finger of God, yes.
The breath of God.
The KJV specifically. Cool.
Yeah, I just don't think you understand how historical facts are taken from history. Like, for instance, I'm sure you've heard the fact that, like, Plato's writings, we don't actually have any. I'm sorry, Socrates' writings, we actually don't have any of his writings. We get all of our teachings from about Socrates from Plato, who wrote
Yep.
about what he said. So again, if you're going to have this hyper skeptic standard and you're going to apply it, you know, if you're going to apply it evenly to everything, then you're going to have to call into question almost everything from history, because that's how, you know, we didn't have video cameras, we didn't have the printing press, we didn't have paper that was widely owned and people that were even literate. So when historians look at things that happen in antiquity, they have a much different standard than they would looking at something, you know, in the 1900s or the 1800s, 1700s. We're talking about 2,000 years ago. So it's completely reasonable to look at people like historical figures that were over these churches, like the church fathers, and they are kind of speaking for the body of Christians because they are the leaders, right? So they're kind of speaking for what these Christians believed, and their writings line up with the gospel message.
Okay, we're in the gospel.
So
okay, the gospel
it's not
message.
like it contradicts it.
Okay, Son, where did all the disciples die for their beliefs and get martyred because of Jesus?
Well, John didn't. John lived
Yeah, sure.
and took care of the Holy Mother according to church tradition.
And what information are you getting that from?
Church tradition. So the writings of the church fathers, the writings of the early Christians.
Where was it read?
In the manuscripts that they wrote.
Which one?
The documentation. I mean, I don't know the specific one for those, but you can definitely look for the name and you can find them. But we have them, or we have discovered them archaeologically. We have found. You can go read Against Heresies. You can go read Clement of Rome. You can go read Saint Irenaeus. You can go read all these historical figures.
Yep, I have.
These are okay. Well, they're legitimate historical accounts of what the early Christians believed.
And guess what? None of those things that you just named, except for one, name the time or the disciple that died or was martyred for their beliefs. And Eusebius of Caesarea and Clement of Alexandria were born in 150 AD and 230 AD. They did not witness any of the disciples die.
They're not saying I never said.
The only one that I know. I listened to you and I did not interrupt you, so shut the fuck up. And
I said the church tradition.
I said that the church, and you said the church tradition derives from
church tradition is not eyewitness.
You said the church tradition derives from manuscripts. Your words, not mine. The only one that you said that was true was Clement of Rome. Clement of Rome recorded the deaths of Paul and Peter in the year 95 AD. That is reasonable. I believe that Peter and Paul died for their belief in Jesus. I have 100% reason to believe that. And, however, James getting either boiled in oil or died of old age, the only document that you have to support that will either come from Clement of Alexandria or Eusebius of Caesarea. They were born 100 years after those events took place.
I will admit. Yeah, I will admit. I mean, we don't have as much evidence when it comes to their actual deaths, and I don't think anyone would say it 100% happened. But again, what I will say is that that's what the church passed down. That's what the people. But I don't see why that calls into whether they were killed or not. I mean, it doesn't call into question what they saw, and it doesn't call into question their reliability.
Yep, you're right.
And like I said, you'd have to then you're kind of making an argument from silence, because do you have any information that contradicts those accounts and says that actually, in fact, they were not boiled alive? They lived here and these people knew them. So you're now making an argument from silence, which is not a very strong argument.
It's a very strong argument from silence, and here's why. Is because
Arguments
I did not interrupt you, so shut your fucking mouth. I did not interrupt you, so shut your fucking mouth. It's like this. The Christian narrative is that
this argument of silence is good.
The Christian I say that argument, it's a very strong argument of silence, and I say that all the time. Because here's the case, son. Now shut your fucking mouth because I didn't interrupt you. Is that if the Christian narrative is that all the disciples died for their belief in Jesus, and you would not die for something that you knew to be a lie. That is something that every apologist will use. However, the only recorded disciples' deaths that we have come from Peter and Paul. I 100% believe those, and I've been very consistent with this fact. The thing is, these things are not recorded, they're not written down, they're not historical. There is no context which you can use to prove that this actually happened, like you can with Jesus' death, or with Paul's death, or Peter's death. So to make a bold statement, the burden of proof doesn't fall on me to show that it didn't happen. The burden of proof falls on you to show that it did happen. It is your claim, not mine.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, the evidence I have is church tradition. Do you have any evidence to the contrary?
Was there any church tradition is not manuscript evidence? You've said
Really?
that.
Because that's how we know how the ancient Jews lived. That's how we know how the Native Americans lived and what they believed in was because of tradition. They passed down what their ancestors believed in. I don't think you understand what tradition is, and that pointing to tradition to understand a culture or understand a historical movement in antiquity is a completely valid form of scholarly historical works. That's what we do. We look at what is the tradition, where do these traditions come from, and okay, based on these traditions, this is how they lived. We don't have the Native Americans didn't write down everything that they did, right? So it's a fallacy to say just because we don't have a written account of any particular thing that a body of people did, that therefore there's no evidence that this particular body of people did a thing. That's fallacious reasoning.
If I show you that we do have recorded evidence of what the Native Americans believed around the time that we sort of invaded North America, would you concede and say that you're wrong?
I'm sure. Could they even write? I don't even know if they had a writing
yes,
system.
you could write in 1500.
I think they did more like drawings. No, I'm talking about the like pre-American Native Americans. But it was just one example. I'm just saying that tribes. No, I'm not. I'm just.
Yeah, you are.
You're trying to do a red herring. I was just trying to bring up a point about how when we look at antiquity, when we look at ancient cultures, we look at tradition, and tradition is a valid form of historical evidence.
That is the hardest backpedal I've ever seen. You went from...
So tradition is not a valid form of historical evidence?
In 2 sentences, you went from tradition is absolutely 100% a valid form of evidence. We didn't have it recorded.
I never said it.
You just said it! It was the last thing you just fucking said. You said that tradition is a valid form of historical...
You're not listening.
Just because I'm loud doesn't mean I'm emotional. Yeah. I'm very logical right now. Is that you just went from, in 2 sentences, historical is a very valid form of tradition, and we can rely on tradition even if we don't have it written down.
No, see, now you
and then when I said, if I bring you historical evidence, like historical manuscript evidence that shows us anything about what the Native Americans believed and that they really existed in these places, would you concede? You completely backpedaled and said,
do you think the manuscript evidence
really,
shows you? Do you think that the only... Do you think that everything we believe about the Native Americans is only based on manuscript evidence of what they wrote down?
I believe that the manuscript evidence is the strongest form. So, most.
I'm not arguing that.
Yeah, no,
I'm not arguing that. What I'm saying is you don't have any evidence to the contrary. I'm presenting evidence. You're making an argument from silence, which I think is weak. You don't have any contract. Now, if you could show me, here, look, we have accounts that James was teaching in Asia and they wrote about him. So that's a contradiction in the stories of the tradition. Okay, then that's different. But now I'm not, again, and I did say, does tradition 100% prove a thing happened? No. And even the church teaches that you don't necessarily have to believe that James was boiled alive, for instance, but I personally trust the church. I trust the church tradition. So that's what I believe happened, and I don't see any evidence to the contrary. So again, I'm not saying you're 1,000% wrong. It definitely happened.
Oh, did I freeze? Can everyone hear me? I think I froze. I need to close some shit.
We see you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes, hear you the whole time.
Can everyone else...
Do you guys want some rules?
Everyone's roboting a little bit. Sorry,
some gentleman rules.
I'll jump in a second.
Gentleman rules. Yeah, we can set it up so you guys have 5 minutes each to respond.
No, I heard that. No, but it's like just let's duke it out. I can probably I'd be down to formal debate case on because I do think he's a schmuck, and I would love to formal debate him.
Oh.
I think you're winning.
You gotta defeat the schmuck allegations, case on.
Boiled in oil, huh? Here's a guy who's just doing it by himself. Just chilling.
Avatar thing? That's Lucifer told him to, and he's gonna kill himself too. And people are gonna watch. It's like at a circus.
Mind over
What's up,
matter.
Bubba?
Me and Case on.
Actually, this is
Another
like a magic
recorded
trick
debate.
they do. It's
Wait,
not real.
So whose cross-examination are we doing right now?
You guys something.
Well,
No,
like,
no Muslim
there's
stuff.
been no cross-examination really. It's just like Kayson is saying that he relies on the historical narrative of the church, even if it was just an oral tradition, because that's what the tradition is. I say it's not reliable because that is the point that I wanted to make before I cut out, is that back in the time of 0 to 50 AD is a time when they heavily believed in spirituality and supernatural miracles, and they believed that they could talk like prophets had a direct communication to God. So their times where they didn't have the same science and technology as we have, where we understand things about psychology, means these people are a lot less reliable. And the first recorded accounts that we have of everyone but Peter and Paul, and also Judas and James, the brother of John, because those are recorded in the Bible, is Clement of Rome.
This is just cringe. This is just
95.
cringe
Shut
skepticism.
the fuck up. I did not interrupt a word you said.
It's very cringe.
Is that if those people didn't have access to the same technology, and this is what happens when motherfucking cocksuckers.
Can I say? But could I just say?
No,
anything?
you cannot.
I could just
Shut
use
the
that
hell up.
excuse for
Shut your
anything we
fucking
know about
cocksucking
Caesar,
mouth.
anything we
shut
know
the
about
fuck
You're
up,
fucking
man.
moderator.
Oh
What are you doing?
God.
Kayson is
Right?
the biggest spur.
Wait, who?
Is it?
And then I got fucking muted.
You
As
didn't.
a
It wa-
moderator,
it
I
was-
didn't
as
touch
a
anything.
moderator,
Yeah, I know,
as a
right.
moderator,
Silent is the
Is
most
this an
controversial.
official debate? 5 minutes each?
What people want to say
now
about
You
me.
guys are acting like
oh my goodness,
And then I
I
got fucking muted, Grudgeon. What the fuck is wrong with you?
I didn't mean you.
Who did? Supreme?
No,
I think it
No,
was.
no, that
Prince?
was silent. It was silent.
saw
No, I haven't. I
my
didn't read
mouth.
it. But look at me.
Okay.
Look, that's what I said. I said silence is the most controversial line.
Dude, could you guys let me speak for 1 second?
Silent. It's me and Case.
We're gonna let.
I'm not
We're
really.
going to let Bubba finish his point, and then we're gonna let Kason speak. But you guys have to stay out of it for now. Go ahead, Bubba.
The last point that I made was, I'll summarize, which was like they didn't have access to the same science and they didn't have access to the same technology and science and psychology that we had. That would make their testimonies more unreliable. They believed in supernatural miracles and prophets, and also, so what would be the most reliable would be historical documentation, which would come from manuscripts. The earliest that we have are from Eusebius of Caesarea, Clement of Alexandria, who records all the other 10 disciples' deaths. Clement of Rome is the only one who records Peter and Paul's deaths.
Kason, respond, and I also want to point something out. That is.
Okay.
No?
No, I just think again. I think and I've heard this objection many times. It's been refuted by many other Christians that will do a better job than me. But it's just this hyper skeptic, and it's this double standard that atheists like this like to hold for certain
atheist.
historical accounts and other historical accounts. They have no problem with the fact that we have no manuscripts of Socrates, though, but they'll accept that Socrates is a real person, that he really taught those things, that Plato recorded everything he said accurately, that maybe Plato wasn't manipulated by some religious ideology like he's bringing up. So it's all speculation. It's all not scholarly at all. This is not how the scholars look at historical information. Any secular scholar will tell you that the biblical account is history. I mean, now, do they believe that, maybe some of the divine claims are true? No, but we know Jesus was crucified. We know that Jesus was a real person. We know that this is what the early Christians definitely believed. So to just throw it out and say, well, during this time they were spiritual and all that. Okay, well, during the time of Caesar, they were polytheists. So does that mean that everything Caesar says, we got to look at it through the lens of, well, he's a polytheist, so he's crazy and he's unreliable and he's spiritual. So anything that he said, is probably wrong. Like that again, just a hypocrisy.
I'm so
As a mod, I want to add something quickly to what Kason is saying to kind of help out his point. we do have historical records that have been authenticated to come from the first century that write things like Jesus is king, Jesus is God, Jesus was a real person, Jesus performed miracles.
Okay.
We have the shroud. We have information backing up in writing. We have like churches from the first century that have like images of the apostles doing Catholic things.
I know this. I've linked it in the side chat because I'm so fucking happy that Kason brought up this point. It's that the reason that I'm able to separate the reason that I'm able to separate the supernatural claims from the historical claims is because, just like a lot of books, the Bible and the Gospels have a dual genre. They are a theological book baked into a historical narrative. So I can rationally look at the claims that are happening in history, like, oh, Jesus preached at the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Jesus was, what else? What else did Jesus do? That was like just strictly historical, no supernatural. Like, he met the 12 disciples. You can historically conclude that these things actually happened, but then you separate that from the theological, and you're like, oh, he probably didn't walk on water. He probably wasn't God. He probably didn't rise from the dead. And so it's just like how I can take it like a fable, like the story of the tortoise and the hare. I could separate the morality claims, the philosophical claims, like I can agree that slow and steady wins the race, but I don't actually think that a real fucking turtle raced a real fucking rabbit down a real fucking track. You can reasonably separate the theological claims from the historical claims. I wrote that out very well in the video I posted in the side chat.
Yeah, again, these are just the same played out, like, this is nothing new. This is the same type of objections. Okay, so the tortoise and the hare objection, right? Okay, so obviously there's genres. You even recognize genres. So when people are writing Harry Potter, okay, the author is not claiming that this thing actually happened. The Bible is different. The Bible is written as a historical eyewitness account of what actually happened. So the genre is completely different than a fable. I mean, this is like a brain dead, retarded. I mean, your other points are a little bit better. This one, some of these are just so played out, like, you got to abandon them. They've been said so many times. Genre, right? So again, if you're writing about the tortoise and the hare, the person that's writing it is not trying to relay the message that this actually happened. They're relaying the message that this is a fable and meant to tell a story. The Bible is not presented in that way, and the early Christians did not see it that way. They saw it as, this was what Luke went out and asked the eyewitnesses that were there and the people that knew the eyewitnesses what happened. And the Gospels are four different attempts at accounting what happened during Jesus's time on earth. And these are presented as historical documents, that these things actually happened, not that it was, a mystical thing and it was meant to tell a lesson. So that's you assuming that it is, but the eyewitnesses said they really saw this.
We don't have any. No, I won't make that point. The point that I will make is that you can rationally conclude the genre of the Gospels to be a historical fiction. You could even say a historical fantasy, but I wouldn't go that far. But
that's absurd.
Is that it's a historical fiction because it's making claim, just like I'm not sure if you've ever read a real historical fiction book, like books on World War II, like Saving Private Ryan. That's a book about a real event that really happened with real characters that existed, like Churchill and with whoever the president was, I think Woodrow Wilson at World War II. And talking about these people who really existed, who did these things that didn't actually happen. That's a historical fiction. When you have this person called Jesus who really existed in this place that really existed, and he did these things, which he was actually probably there for, but he didn't. But you add on all this fictional stuff about, like, walking on water, rising from the dead, dying, or what else? Ascending into heaven. That's the genre. Then that's the genre that allows me to take the philosophical claims out of the Bible. Separate the philosophical claims from the historical claims and the theology. Most importantly.
So I guess I mean, this is the exact same objection that I just showed was completely stupid. So I guess I have to explain again how Saving Private Ryan is a intentionally written fictitious work.
So is the Gospel.
The author of that story intended for it to be known that it was fiction. They never claimed that it was real. They never claimed that these things actually happened, and then later we found out that it was fiction. Okay, so again, you're not. I don't know why you keep bringing up this stupid point, but I'll explain it again. The gospel accounts are accounts that are presented by the authors as something that actually happened. And if you ask historians, secular historians, they will tell you whether the accounts in the Bible happened or not. Aside from that, it's indisputable that the people that wrote this actually believed that this happened. You can go and look at, this is the consensus of historical secular historians. Whether it happened or not, that's not, obviously they're not saying that it did, but they're saying that the people that wrote it, they actually believed that this stuff happened. They actually went into hiding. They actually went under persecution. Okay, whether we know that John was boiled alive or not, what we do know is that the Christians, the early Christians, lived under persecution for 300 and something years and refused to recant their beliefs. We have writings of legates sent by the emperors that are going into Christian communities and reporting back to the emperor on what is going on in these communities, because the emperor wants to know. And he's saying to the emperor, I asked them to recant their beliefs. I told them, look, we're going to kill you. All you have to do is say you're not a Christian and reject this religion. And they refused under threats of death. Okay, that is not the same as Saving Private Ryan. I don't know how much better I can explain that to you, but that's all I
like this. How do you possibly know that the authors intended to write the gospel as a true historical narrative?
Because they were willing to die for their belief. They really believed in it.
Or two things. One, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say that it's reasonable to conclude that the disciples didn't really die for their beliefs, and then say that they were willing to die for their beliefs. I didn't interrupt you. I just asked you a very simple question, which you answered. It's that you don't have access to the author's intentions when they wrote the gospel, and I can come to a neither do you.
So stupid.
Neither do you.
This is why I wouldn't debate you. You're stupid.
You can't possibly know what the author's intention for writing the gospels were. They could have been trying to push a lie. I can rationally conclude, just like you can rationally conclude, that the authors intended to push a narrative that was a lie, and and you can rationally conclude that they meant to tell a true fictional story that they believed actually happened. You have no way of knowing, apart whether the appeal to fallacies, like appeal to consensus of the seculars, appeal to the consensus of the historians, appeal to the consensus of the church fathers.
God forbid.
Me and you, God forbid.
God forbid we appeal to the consensus of the scholars. God forbid.
Me and you can come to the same rational conclusion using the same tools at our disposal and come to the opposite opposite conclusions. And we're both totally 100% rational in doing so, which you fail to recognize. You think that I'm being irrational when I'm using the exact same reasoning as you are.
I don't think you're being irrational. I think you're being inconsistent. That's what I've said many times.
Okay,
I think you're being inconsistent when you're comparing this particular historical account with others that you definitely believe in.
Like?
Well, basically, any historical account that claims anything supernatural, regardless of the evidence or the proof of it from antiquity, it's never going to substantiate you. So even if even if an alien came down, and we have ancient Egyptian writings saying, hey, the aliens came down and they did X, Y, Z. Regardless, you don't believe in the supernatural, so you're not going to accept it. So you already have a bias towards supernatural, anything happening outside of material. So there's no evidence that could be presented to you from antiquity that you would actually accept and say, oh, I guess a supernatural thing did happen. So what you have to try to ask yourself is, okay, did happen 2,000 years ago? What would my criterion actually be for me to believe in it? Like, what would I actually have to see? What is it?
To believe that it's more reasonable than not that it actually happened. That exhausts any naturalistic explanation.
Okay, so that doesn't really. That's very
that is the answer
non-specific.
To your question.
So that's very non-specific. Yeah, so I don't know what that really means.
Here.
What practically would you have to see?
I'll expand. It's that. So when I
say an example,
when it's more reasonable than not. What I mean is that there has been evidence that has been shown to me. It could be empirically, but it's more than likely eyewitness testimony. That has been evidence that has been shown to me that I conclude like is more reasonable than not that it happened. So it's one thing if like an angel were to literally appear to me. That's empirical evidence. I actually believe that happened. But if my own mother, who's my mother's not actually this, but if my own mother, who has no reason to lie to me and is extremely secular, were to come to me and she were to like say that she ascended into heaven, not in the dream, she actually physically went there and then 2 angels took her up by her arms, something supernatural happened to her, then that would be evidence that is more reasonable than not to conclude that the supernatural actually happened. That could be said about, but with the case of the Gospels, for reasons I said earlier, it's not the case. I believe that they were pushing a narrative. I believe that they were pushing a narrative. I believe that they were pushing a narrative for a reason, and they also at that time believed in a lot of supernatural shit.
Yeah. Again, I mean, maybe that's good for you. Maybe that's convincing to other people. I think that's very, very non-specific. I don't know what that means. I asked for an example. So, like,
my mother.
From okay, your mother didn't live 2,000 years ago. I don't know if maybe you didn't hear me, so I'm going to give you some grace.
Example of
I'm going to repeat my question.
Okay, fine, fuck it.
I'm going to repeat my question.
I'll re-answer it.
If something supernatural happened 2,000 years ago, Strick, your mother was not alive 2,000 years ago. Back into my question. What evidence, if you can maybe give an example, what evidence would you have to see to believe that that thing reasonably could have happened?
This is where I will get a little bit shaky. It's like, I don't think
that's fine.
It's like 4 is not enough. I would say more is enough to provide more of a reasonable doubt. And also, especially with the 4 that we have Luke's gospel, Luke is not an eyewitness of Jesus. He's getting his information from Paul, who was also not an eyewitness of the events that happened in Luke's gospel. We have Mark, who was also not an eyewitness of Jesus, who is going off of Peter, who I 100% believe would lie about the events that happened with Jesus. But then we have Matthew and John. John makes some very outrageous claims, and Matthew makes some more... doesn't portray Jesus as God as much as the other Gospels do, I believe.
You don't think Matthew is a version of Jesus?
I can't hear.
Let me just go. I just want to quickly respond before I forget about this, and then you can respond to them as well. Okay. So first of all, we understand that historians are not eyewitnesses, right? But yet we don't discount historians doing works and finding what happened in the past by asking eyewitnesses or evaluating archaeological data or evaluating other kinds of evidence that would lead them to a conclusion about what happened in history. So you don't have to be an eyewitness. So I don't need just eyewitness testimony to prove something happened in the past or to reasonably prove, right? Because let's not get into the whole argument about proof, because let's just say reasonably believe, right? So there's many things that we believe about history that we don't have eyewitness, handwritten, manuscript documentation that this thing happened, yet it's an event that we believe based on other evidence. So eyewitness is not the end-all be-all, first of all. Second of all, I mean, to be fair, eyewitness testimony has been shown to be like some of the most unreliable evidence. And I'll admit that as someone who believes in eyewitness testimony of the apostles and things. So there's other evidence that you can obviously appeal to prove something historically happened. Now,
man, what was the make and model and license plate of the car?
So, right, exactly. And then you ask the other guy across the street and he'll say a different thing. So, I don't have a problem with Luke, who is a very smart physician, right? He's a very smart guy. He obviously writes in multiple different languages. He's very well educated. Going around during that time period, and we can prove the document is from that time period, that the eyewitnesses of Jesus would still be alive, and recording the different accounts. And I actually love that we have 4 different accounts. For me, that bolsters the evidence because it gives more credence that there was so many people that saw it, that there's different accounting. So one example someone gave me one time was like the Titanic. So when we read diary accounts of people that wrote while the Titanic was sinking, what was happening, some people said it broke in the middle first. Some people said, well, it started going, it started breaking towards the rear first. Or some people said certain things happened that contradicts other eyewitness accounts. So I think that it's when you look at the Gospels, we have to understand that this does appear to be legitimate eyewitness accounts, not something that's just fabricated. Because if it was fabricated, everything would be perfect, everything would be seamless. There would not be any contradictions as far as, for instance, Judas was hung and Judas killed himself, right? There wouldn't be that. Obviously, the gospel writers, if they're making up a farce, if they're making up a lie, they're going to make sure, like the Quran, that everything is in order and there's no, no, everybody, all the eyewitnesses just happen to agree. So for me, that's even more evidence that these people were just literally recording what they were being told by the eyewitnesses in which they interviewed.
And this is where I would say that first I want to let you know that you need to be an eyewitness to reliably portray an event. It's and then the cop example that other dude was trying to say before he left. Man, please describe the license plate number. If a cop is not going to go to me and ask for my eyewitness of a crash that happened on 33rd Street, and then I tell him that I'm getting my eyewitness testimony from an actual eyewitness. What I mean by that is it's like if my buddy were to describe to me the events of a car crash, and then you were to see me as a reliable person who's interpreting the events of what actually happened. I don't know what actually happened. I wasn't there. I don't know what colors the car actually were because I didn't see them. I don't know how they hit each other because I didn't actually see them. I didn't hear them. I didn't see them. I didn't feel them. I didn't taste them. I didn't smell them. And you're saying yourself that eyewitness testimony is very shaky and unreliable, and you would expect contradictions like in the Titanic. Okay, then what would be the most reliable form of evidence in order to portray a reliable historical narrative?
Yeah. Well, from that time period, and that's why I'm happy that you're going to go back and think about what evidence you would actually have to see, because when I think about the evidence that would reasonably be around during that time 2,000 years ago, I think this is the best we could possibly ask for. We have paintings, we have writings, we have historical records of mass migration. We have historical records of mass amount of Gentiles and Jews abandoning their culture, extra biblical, extra outside of, the Bible accounts. We have all this evidence that these people really did basically start a revolution in Judea and Rome and lived under persecution for 300 years. We have Josephus that talks about it. We have other historians that are not Christians talking about it. We have the letters sent by the emperors to their different legates and things talking about the Christians. So we know that this stuff definitely happened. So I think that there's a lot more evidence other than just the eyewitnesses. And I do think that all of it together creates a perfect story and a perfect picture. And again, justify true belief, right? If we're going to go by this hyper, has to be a video camera, I don't believe it type of mentality, then we can't believe anything about antiquity. So I really feel like, granted, we may not know for 100% fact. It may not even be a justified true belief. I actually have to look into whether how historically accurate the claims that James was boiled alive and things like that. But even you yourself admitted that Peter was killed, right? And he was crucified in Rome. You even admitted that. So you did say before that, and I forgot to mention this, so I'll bring it back up now. You did say before that I definitely don't believe Peter, because if anybody was going to lie, it would be him. Yet you also said that he was the only one that you actually believed really did die for what he believed in. He didn't recant. He stuck to his guns. He did not. And this is something I bring up to the Muslims all the time. Muhammad, I think this argument works great for Islam, because what did Muhammad get out of lying? Everything. He became a god king. He became a warmonger. He got to marry a 9-year-old child. He had multiple wives. He had all the money in the world. Everything he said was dripping from the mouth of God, so he could basically just make up whatever he wanted, right? But the apostles, it was completely different. They abandoned their culture. They abandoned their families. They abandoned their way of life, and they lived underground in poverty, in isolation, in fear, and eventually, as we both agree, Peter, who's the head of them, and you said the most unreliable, is killed in Rome.
I didn't say that Peter
publicly executed. Well, you said that Peter definitely was. It appears that we have a good amount of evidence that you said it's reasonable to believe that Peter was actually killed.
Yeah.
In Rome and crucified for his beliefs.
Crucified upside down. Clement of Rome, who is the only person who reliably records the Gospels because he was actually alive at the time that the events took place. The reason I totally believe Peter was lying is because he had every reason, like you said, to lie. He was a fisherman who, I believe in the historical Peter. Like, he was a fisherman who met Jesus, went with him across his ministry, saw him as more than just a man, but a teacher and a mentor. And he, after Jesus died, I have every reason to believe that Peter would have gone around pushing the narrative that Jesus was God, Jesus resurrected, Jesus walked on water, because Peter got elevated, like we are agreeing to the level of the leader.
How did he get elevated?
He's the first fucking pope. He is
of the underground church that's in persecution that Rome and Jews want to murder.
He, as you know, in Acts 1-8, went on a ministry where he convinced many people and did exactly what you said. Convinced a lot of people to start the early church.
Because he actually believed what he saw.
I didn't interrupt you. I don't think he actually saw it, though, to answer your interruption. Is that I believe that he did actually try to portray the message that he resurrected, not because he actually saw it, but because he was because he would have been elevated to, like I said, the position of the first pope of the early church, and he would have been persuaded.
What good is that?
I didn't interrupt a word that you said. And he would have been elevated again to the part of leader of the disciples, influential person, and then he would have gotten killed for his troubles by the Romans. And you didn't answer my question, though, which I want you to first answer very directly and quickly. If eyewitness testimony is very shaky and unreliable, then what would be the end-all, be-all of historical narrative? Or evidence.
Yeah, I did answer that. I said that it's not just the eyewitness testimony. Remember when I was bringing up the archaeological evidence, the evidence of mass migration, the evidence extra biblically that we have from writings of Josephus, and remember when I'm saying all that. If it was just the eyewitness testimony, it would be really hard. If it was just like, hey, here's the eyewitnesses of the Christians that are writing about the Christians that are saying the Christians saw what the Christians believe that they saw. I don't know. It would be a little bit more shaky, but I think it's when you look at the totality of everything, that's when you see the full picture, and I think that gives the argument and the claim a lot more credence, because it's not just like, oh well, how do you know that thing happened? Well, because the Christians said it did. Well, did anyone else say that Peter was crucified in Rome, or that the Jews, that these people abandoned their culture? Did these people abandon their culture and go under persecution for 300 years, or was it just the Christians claiming that they were under persecution? You know what I mean? So we have extra biblical evidence to prove that actually happened. So again, I mean, you're saying that Peter got authority. I just want to object to the Peter thing. And obviously, there's no way that right now there's no way that either of us can prove each other wrong, like 100%. We're just talking about what is most reasonable. I don't believe that it's reasonable to assume that this man, first of all, if you actually look at the biblical accounts, he wasn't just a poor fisherman. He owned multiple boats. He actually owned a company, a business of fishing, and fishing brought a lot of money. Yeah, actually, I was reading this yesterday. You can read the book. It's called Peter the Rock. And they'll go through the actual biblical accounts, and they'll talk about him as a fisherman. He was not a poor, uneducated guy. I mean, he obviously was literate, right? He obviously wrote. He obviously was a good speaker. So he wasn't just some poor guy he owned multiple boats. It appears that he owned some kind of company or business, and that after Jesus died, and I'm glad I read this book because the author talks about it directly, is that after Jesus died, if all that was false, he should have just gone back to fishing, because it's over. Like, Jesus is not there anymore. There's nothing to gain. He could just go back and start his fishing business again, but he didn't. He didn't get any money. He didn't. Okay, he got power over the Christians that were dispersed over hundreds of thousands of miles, and he had to hide in hiding, and the only power he had was in the letters that he wrote to people. I mean, if you could show me, like, Peter lived in a mansion, or Peter had all this money, or Peter was elevated to the point where he had multiple wives, but you got to give me something more than, well, he did it because he got some authority.
The authority is
authority over what?
Authority over the early fucking church. which is a very high
What
level
church?
of praise.
The church
The
is
Christian
that
church, yes, the Christian church, which
the Catholic Church
you
at that
keep
point.
on
At the point,
you
at that
keep
point,
on,
the church is
here's the
dispersed.
thing, you keep on elevating the church to be highly dispersed over hundreds of thousands of miles, having influence over hundreds of thousands of people. But then you want to try and backpedal a little bit and say, oh, Peter had nothing to gain. Bullshit. He had the influence. He was the influence of the leader of a highly.
Do you think these churches were like established?
But here's the thing that I wanted. Here's the
point.
Here's the point that I wanted to bring up is that you're talking about a religious empire. That's what you just said.
80-35 religious empire of Christianity.
The religious empire of Christianity. You're talking about the religious empire that was going to expand in Rome for the next for the next 100 years, and then
Peter died way before that. So what power?
Right. Yeah, right. It's the point that I was gonna make was not related to Peter because me and you are gonna come to a fucking.
We're just talking about Peter.
We're gonna get to a brick wall talking about Peter because you're Catholic, not Catholic.
Correct.
You are Catholic.
Catholic.
You're a Catholic, so we're gonna get to a fucking brick wall talking about Peter. Is that just because that the church was rapidly expanding doesn't prove that the narrative that actually is being pillared by actually happened. It just proves that a lot of people are being convinced that Jesus was actually rose from the dead and that people ought to follow the way that Jesus lived. It doesn't prove at all.
So
like Josephus in Antiquity of the Jews and in what's it called? It starts with a T. No, it starts with an F. No, it does start with a T. Testimonium Flavium does not record that Jesus rose from the dead, which is extra biblical, like you said. None of these external biblical sources say that Jesus resurrected from the dead, or that the disciples died for their beliefs. They were martyred because of Jesus, except for Clement of Rome and Eusebius of Caesarea and Clement of Alexandria. They lived 100 years after after Jesus died, at least. The things that you've brought up so far don't prove that the narrative actually happened. It just shows that the narrative was being portrayed to thousands of people.
You do understand
he's cutting out.
I mean, silence.
He's cutting out. Am I cutting out or is he cutting out?
It's him.
Okay.
Okay.